Excellent. So welcome to the last night of the REST course. We have, let's see, I'm going to pin, there we go. So we have a review that we're going to do tonight, and I'm going to do a little semi-graduation ceremony, because I think it's important to celebrate this journey that we've been on and all the things that we've learned together and all the, it's been a growing class, and I always get like emotional the last class because it's like, we've come so far. Why does it have to end? But that also speaks to just how passionate I am about this work and this project. So tonight, let's go ahead and jump into review. Mercury is in retrograde. So I'm just like keeping that in mind as I deal with the technology pieces. Okay, hold on here. That's not what I want to share. So let me get out of that. All right, and here we go. Now I can do this. And we're going to start with what is trauma, just a review on what trauma is, because it's important to know, to really understand and define it for ourselves, and remembering that the experience of trauma is very individual. So what one person sees as trauma, another may not. And that's okay, but understanding that there's a difference, and understanding that trauma is trauma. So it's not like your trauma is worse than my trauma or anything like that. Trauma is trauma. It's the body keeping the score of things that have happened to us. And we now have a responsibility to heal and respond to them versus reacting to them. So trauma is a response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. And it's also held in the body. So this is another reason why I'm really big on our somatic practices. So we do breath work, tapping, stretching. I recommend trauma-informed yoga unless you're a hypermobile individual. And then I recommend more something a little more cardio leaning, or swimming. I really love the swimming, or just even the act of soaking in a tub or a hot tub or a pool can be very helpful to the body when healing trauma, because it's inflammation that's in your body. So when you think of arthritis, you think about just that alone, just arthritis alone. That's something that's so common. It doesn't matter what your background is. If you've used your body in this lifetime, you have probably at some point had an experience, especially if you're middle-aged or older, with arthritis. And what arthritis is inflammation in the joints and different structures of the bones throughout the body. And that's important to remember because it's a type of trauma. And it's your body telling you, we've worked and now we hold this for you. We hold all those years of labor for you. And is that to say that there's a way to heal arthritis? I believe so, but I don't think the science has caught up yet. But it's also inflammation of your nervous system, right? So whenever you find yourself mentally catastrophizing and everything is wrong, or it could just get worse and worse and worse, all of those things, if you feel like you're just in your head all the time and it's chaos, that's a sign that you might have an inflamed nervous system. If you have irritable bowel syndrome, that's a sign you might have an inflamed nervous system. If you have chronic pain and you're not totally sure where it comes from, could be a sign you have an inflamed nervous system. And what happens with these inflamed nervous systems is that it's like they fire these signals throughout the nervous system so much that they become chronic and fatigued in doing so. And they're either going to shut down or they can't shut down. And so you're going to feel that throughout your body in different ways. And so if you listen to Gabor Mate, he's very much all about how autoimmune diseases are related to childhood trauma. And I lean in that belief because I do think that there's a lot of things from childhood And when you combine any stress from childhood that wasn't healthy, any shame from childhood that wasn't healthy, any trauma that happened in childhood, and all accumulates throughout the body. And it's like, yeah, if I'm working as a child in a laborious situation, and I was also under duress at the time, it makes sense that I worked my body in inflammation and therefore created more inflammation throughout the body. So that's just a way to think of that. So in general, it's a communal, individual, internal, but it's also treatable. Inflammation is treatable. So trauma is the complete brain to bone disruption, and it calls us to reach to our souls, our inner selves, our higher selves, and or God, if you choose, in order to heal. But the great news is that it can heal. And to me, healing can be a right now manifestation. And oftentimes when I work with survivors, they'll say, I thought I healed that, when we start going over different things. And what's happened is you've healed a part of it. So you remember parts work, there's a lot of different parts, and some of these parts are entangled. And so as you do healing work, you might have healed this part, but maybe it's still connected to this part that's not so healed. And so it's going to feel like sometimes you're going back at it. I also liken it to knotted string. So if you've ever had a string or a chain, a necklace chain that got knotted up, and you're just trying to like, is this the loop? Is this the loop? Is that the one? You know, and that's very much what the journey of healing trauma can feel like. So if you ever find yourself going like, it's all connected to everything, congratulations, you're doing it right in your healing journey. So I just want to review real quick the trauma and their scope. So on a communal level, an acute trauma, we talked about shooting, we talked about the pandemic, and then we talked about war, which is very complex. So imagine you have a war going on during a pandemic and there's shooting everywhere. And that, like, you can just imagine the layers of trauma that come with that on a communal level, let alone an individual level. Like, what is that happening from a child's perspective? What is happening from an elder's perspective? What is happening, you know, on a frontline worker perspective or in the soldier's perspective? And then you add that, and that's just the individual, and imagine that on a more communal level. And that's where the next one is the individual. So, you know, that scraping the knee, you break a leg, you do something of that nature, that's an acute one-off, not likely to happen again, trauma. And then you've got that chronic trauma, and this speaks to that, like arthritis is like a chronic trauma, and it's because it's the inflammation in your body. And then complex trauma, you know, feeling like your brain is just wired everywhere but within. And that can be due to having an acute trauma that so like I'll give an example here. When I was 19 years old, I was a horse trainer, and I had gone out to feed the horses, and I had like 4 of these, they're called yearling, 1-year-old stud colt stallions. And there's a hierarchy that happens in the herd, and I threw the food out, and this one started kicking that one as I turned my back to walk away, and I didn't see it, but my back caught the kick. So right above my hip, where my hips and the spine connect, I have a little scar there. And there's one also just above it where both hooves just pounded just perfectly right there. And so from this one-off trauma that happened with this yearling, these 2 yearling colts that didn't mean me any harm, they were just responding to each other in their natural habitat. I ended up with then a chronic trauma because of course my tailbone got dislocated, and of course my hips went through some trauma. And then it was not treated properly after the fact. I didn't see a doctor immediately after. I didn't go to the hospital immediately after. I literally army crawled my way back to the barn and went home and went to sleep, tried to go to sleep. And so, so that acute trauma then turned into a chronic situation of just, now I have this chronic pain, this chronic, and that lasted for years. And thankfully I have found some exercises that have relieved the pain, and I don't have that struggle anymore. And that just speaks to the fact that even after years, I mean, for about 5 years after that, I had this chronic lower back pain. And now it's very rare that I have back pain. So that was And you add to it that on a genetic level, my father himself had his first back surgery at 19 years old. So you can just imagine the level of stress that came up for me of like, oh my gosh, am I going to be like him and have this back surgery at 19 years old? And then like every 6 to 8 years, we're having another surgery. Thankfully, that was not my situation. And so, but that's that example there. And so this is the, you have the acute, you have the chronic back pain, and then you have like, oh my gosh, this is genetic. This is happening too. We're repeating the cycle. And it just got really complex, the stress levels that came with something that was nobody's fault. Should I have turned my back? I probably could have just thrown the food and backed away. Sure, that would have been safer. Sure, I could have driven the truck out to the pasture to do the feeding. But these were my horses. We knew each other, and there was no reason to think that they would just, on this one particular night, after months and months of eating together at the same trough, that they would suddenly have an issue. So, but animals, natures. So, okay. So types of trauma in their scope, precognitively, before you have an idea, a thought, can even hold such things together, you can have a traumatic experience. Preconception, so before you have a clue about a clue, before you're able to even know that you exist, you can have trauma in your body. Pre-verbal, so before you're able to speak, you absolutely can experience trauma. And I speak to this a little bit in the book when I talk about how I knew in the womb that my mother didn't desire me at that time. It's not that she didn't want another child, but my timing was the perfectly worst timing for her. And so I knew. We talked a little bit about the chakras, but I want to actually just go back here to the brain a little bit, and the frontal lobe where the consciousness resides, and reminding us that that's also where the third chakra actually is. And then the temporal lobe, where the thalamus and the amygdala reside in the very center. So if we were to do this, it would be very center of the brain. And that's actually where the crown chakra resides. And so if you've done any research on these, then you know that the crown chakra is where you connect with your higher self. And then the temporal lobe, that third eye, can see what can't be seen. It's a type of your intuition. And so there's a difference between empath, intuitive, and what's the other? Medium? No, not medium. What does she call herself? I'm trying to think of it, and now I can't think of it.
Psychic?
It is psychic. Clairvoyant. That was the word I was looking for.
Okay.
Clairvoyant. Yes. Thank you, though. That helped me get there. So the difference in these is a clairvoyant can see what's on the horizon, and sometimes they can only see it. Sometimes they can only sense it. And sometimes they can only comprehend it if they start writing. So they'll get like a download, and then they, like, sometimes for me, my left ear rings, and then I can write stuff down, and it's like, I just knew this. I knew this stuff. But the reason I bring this up is because I think that these are catalysts to that healing journey. And when we start tapping into what, in a more spiritual sense and energy, especially, those are going to be things that show us what we haven't seen before. So if we're tapped in and we are grounded and centered and anchored in self, and our chakras are aligned and they're not blocked, or whatever it is that for you is your cleansing and awakening practices, that's where you're going to find the ability to shift and alchemize what's been traumatic and painful in your life into, this is serving me now in this way, or I release it. So it's either I'm going to take how it's serving me now, and I'm no longer going to need it for survival. Instead, I will shift it this way, or I will release it. And these are the energies that you would use, the energy stations or chakras that you would use to do that. All right, so I'm going to just skim through this real quick. Are there any questions or any parts of the curriculum that you want to go back through and get a little more familiar with, since we have the time and space to do so tonight?
No, but I have a question. This is on like the healing parts of it. Would you say that meditation is a big part of like all the different parts of healing, like fight, flight,
Freeze.
freeze, fawn?
I think that it can be a helpful tool, but I also know it to be not helpful for everyone. Just
Oh,
like,
I don't mean just like sitting,
yeah.
but like maybe like walking. That's still meditation or mindfulness.
Yes, mindfulness for sure. For me, meditation looks like I am on a walk and there's nothing, like I don't even take my phone. It's just me on a walk in nature and I actually get bored. Because what happens when in the human brain, when it starts to get bored, it starts looking for things. It starts we're meaning making machines. So it starts looking for things to make meaning out of. And that's when the creative process happens. And healing really happens in a creative space. It's not going to happen in your books. It's not going to happen in your classrooms. It's not going to happen necessarily in your sessions. There will be resources and tools that will help a client heal in those sessions. But once you're out of those sessions, if you aren't fostering creativity, you're stunting the growth of your healing journey. So I would definitely say if your meditation is conducive to creativity, then it's working. If your breath work is conducive to creativity, then it's working. We're created to be creators. And that's why we're meaning making machines. And that's why we're always trying to connect these dots. And that's why RReST was even born, was because I was, I was in a place where I had nothing else to do. And also I was receptive to, I wanted to do something greater than clean my house or just do this thing or that thing that's a repeat of something else someone else did. So absolutely. The best ways to heal are to find the creative things, the things that bring out your inner creator. Great question. So real quick recap on the trauma responses. We have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And in the freeze, there are two kinds of freezes. Do you remember what they are?
A deer and a possum. So
Perfect. I will take it. Yes.
yeah, one's up, the deer's up high, and the
Yep. So a deer, when you think of a deer,
deer is the sympathetic and the possum is the parasympathetic,
or the,
I mean, like the dorsal.
yep. Perfect. Yep. Exactly.
I remember
So
that
that-
one.
Perfect. That's perfect. So the hyper freeze, which is like the deer in the headlights. So when you think of hyper freeze, it's like, like this. And then there's the hypo freeze, which is just shut down, dorsal shutdown. Excellent. All right. And there it is right there. All right. So fawning. Fawning is the people-pleasing, peacekeeping, appeasement heavy, mimicking or mirroring the behavior of others, and conflict avoidant. Fawning is also often stuck in a shame bind. So it comes with a heavier shame bind than most of the others. People can reason away why they fought somebody they shouldn't have fought. And they can reason away why they ran away from a situation they probably should have stuck around for. And they can also reason away the hyperfreeze or the hypofreeze once they've raised awareness about that. And there are schools of thought that the hyperfreeze is an internalized fight and the hypofreeze is an internalized flight. So I don't get too into all that, but it's kind of interesting because I could see it. I could see the hyper freeze, that deer in the headlights being like, we need to fight, but it's stuck internally. And I could also see where if I choose to run away, but I can't, I might choose to shut down and internalize that flight. And I just run away from all uncomfortable subjects. So that's a type of two more ways to look at this interesting freeze response. And then the fawning one, I also point out to people how fawning, there's the shame bind, but then also fawning can be a perfectionism. Fawning can be, fawning, anything that's performative. So whenever you have moved out of a space of trying to connect with others and you move into controlling because you're trying to control your environment, you're trying to control how much trauma might happen to you, all acts of fawning. All of those are acts of fawning. And fawning is, when you think of these as parts, fawning can be like a dozen different parts wrapped into one umbrella of fawning. And so sometimes you'll have the fawning, who is the student that performs great in school, has straight A's, and then at home they mouth off. And more than just mouth off, but like maybe they punch holes in the walls. And that could be a public fawning that comes home with that internalized rage and then uses it on the wall. Fawning. And so now you have this anger part in your fawning response. And so you can start to see how between shame and anger and fear and appeasement and conflict avoidance and performance, how all these things that aren't conducive to connection, but rather control of self, control of others, control of environment, all fall under the fawning umbrella. And it's probably one of the more complex ones. And then we have RReST, the restorative response system theory. So we have rhythm, rise, resolve, and reframe. And I'm going to rest heavily on these tonight because I wanted to go a little bit deeper. So we've talked a little bit about how music, when you're having a fight response, when you're angry, rhythm is a great way to help cope with that. Sometimes it's taking a drive with a certain playlist. Sometimes it's cleaning your house with a certain playlist. Have you ever used music to have a good cry? Absolutely, right? And sometimes, and it's because music is so powerful and it can be used throughout any of these, really. When you look at it, it can even be, this is a type of music. If you know music theory at all, you would look at rhythm as like, that's the timing, and rise is the crescendo, and resolve is the decrescendo, and then reframe is going to be more of that pause. So now you have the entire music theory written throughout RReST. Rhythm can also be helpful whenever you are feeling the buildup. So we talk about the window of capacity, and you can feel when you get activated, but you're still in your window. And if you start employing rhythms of some kind, from tapping your feet to actual EFT tapping to playing an instrument or listening to a song with a strong beat, any of those things can be helpful whenever you start to feel activated, agitated, and heading towards a fight response. But remember that when it comes to the 4 F's, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, these are happening for a reason, and it's important to honor why they're happening versus trying to stop or avoid them. They're happening. They are the reaction to a trauma or a trauma trigger. And so always honor that, and then respond to it with these restorative responses. And the goal of the restorative responses is to take what's already happening that you don't even know it's happening. You're just naturally doing this thing because it's within your DNA, it's within your brain, that you're going to have a fight or flight or freeze or fawn response. And you're going to honor them. I see you, I see that I'm heading in that direction. It's going to take some practice, and sometimes you're going to absolutely feel like you failed at it. But if you go through and you feel yourself like, what is happening in my body right now? Oh, this is a fight response. And then you honor that fight response with, you know what, let's go dancing. Let's have a good rhythmic outlet so that we can tempo this on out of our body, because the important thing is to move out what's no longer serving you. Otherwise, you get trapped in it, your body gets stuck with it, and then it's like, no wonder we're harboring inflammation throughout our joints. We like to harbor our trauma reactions and responses, which is all inflammation.
I have a question first.
Yeah, go for it.
If you're working on a response to the trigger, when do you figure out the trigger? After you've like calmed down?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
because when your brain is offline, there's no
Okay.
conductive thinking happening there.
Okay. Because some people are big on avoiding all triggers. Like
Right.
That's all they do is figure out ways to avoid it.
Right.
And obviously there are some I would avoid.
Sure.
But
sure.
Because they're not going to do me any good. Like if it's in a film or something, and it's like, no, I don't watch that kind of.
Right.
Stuff.
Yeah. I don't go looking for triggers. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. But that makes sense. So you have to calm down first and then look back and say, what made that happen?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And you want to go back and just look at it with compassion. right? Don't look at it as like, how did I go and screw up my life just now? Always, because that's going to be like, you're never not going to be without that part, right? That's the shame part, and that they're doing that to protect you. Look how you screwed this up so that you never do that again, right? But if you go back and you look at it with compassion, you're saying, how can I catch myself before this happens again? There's a type of training out there called conditioned. I think I've talked about conditioned relaxation before, where I would teach an animal to get calm really fast. And there's in this type of training, there's a focus on looking for where the threshold of the window of capacity is. So for instance, great example, you have the holidays coming up and you've got to go to dinner with family members that you don't like to be around. Maybe they've caused you harm and you don't even know why they're invited, right? You already know that there are certain conversations you can't have at that table. You already know that. So those are ways that you've already prepared yourself for, like, these are the boundaries that I'm willing to work within. Boundaries are a huge part of this process. And so knowing what's your threshold. I can't even stand when they say 45's name. So that's my threshold. If they say it more than 3 times, I'm out of my window of capacity. And there is a volcano of emotional charge happening through my mouth at that point, right? So that's an example of how I would go into that situation and prepared for how I'm going to respond compassionately to myself. Now, perhaps I didn't have this information and I've already blown up the family dinner because they just worshiped 45. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Right. And this is just an example of how I feel at a personal level. And so I've gone in and I've called them everything but a child of God, probably. And so now the question is, what would have been the red flag for me that I could have prevented that from happening? It was probably back when they first poured the alcohol. Maybe I should abstain. And some people, that's the very thing they go for when they're like, oh, I'm going to a family dinner. I definitely need the alcohol, right? Because there's this idea that we have more tolerance when really what we have is even less tolerance and less filter, right? But it's because of the way it makes us feel in our body. It's like, I'm feeling this intensity without it feeling like it's doing damage because I have fluid liquid courage going on, right? And that might be the case, right? So you would analyze things like that, like what are all the factors? Because it may not be just one thing. It may not just be the name that they say. It might also be that there was an alcohol factor. It might also be that there was cousin so-and-so said I looked pregnant when I'm clearly just fat. Like, what in the heck is wrong with her? This is 10 years now. Like those situations is like, okay, so now she said that thing. And what happens for me now is someone will say something and I'll be like, okay, that I'm going to just put that. And I will literally be like, okay. And I put it in a box and I literally just like, this is something we're going to meditate about later, or I'm going to do some parts work around this later, right? If you can capture moments like that and say, I'm going to do parts work around you later, you will be surprised at how much your nervous system and your body go, okay, cool. Cause that wasn't cool. Right. So that's another way you can do it, is capture that thought, that comment, that thing that made you go, I see you and I don't like you for that. And just, okay. And there's the thing that also happens is in the rest, that people start getting empowered about, I see what you're trying to trigger me. Oh, I see this thing here. And it's not so much about pointing that out and shaming others for trying to trigger us, because we're completely in charge of our own recovery and our healing and our triggers. But it is to say that they're taking inventory of where the hurts are. And when you are constantly taking inventory of where your hurts are, and you're constantly showing yourself compassion where the hurts and wounds are, then you are then capable of not only creating a deeper well of compassion for yourself, but you can even have that container for all these people who are doing things that irritate, annoy, or harm you. And you can decide which of those are really meaningful enough to put a boundary down. And so maybe we don't need a boundary with cousin so-and-so who calls us pregnant because this is who she is in the world. And instead of seeing that as about me, I can see that as about her. and I can leave it. I cannot even pick that up and just leave it with her. If I can't, then I can take it and put it over here. And we're going to do parts work around this later. We're going to do something REST related around this later. And then, that's a factor. And so then, okay, now we have alcohol at the table. I know I'm solid for the first glass of wine, but by 3, I am super not cool with anyone and anything I don't agree with. So we will limit ourselves or not partake at all, and maybe we'll find another resource to give ourselves so that we can cope while we're in the situation. Or maybe we don't go to the dinner at all. Maybe we decide that Friendsgiving is where it's at and we are done with all of these triggers from our whole life, and we don't have to sit across from the creepy uncle. Like, maybe that's what we decide, right? But that's the cool thing about REST is, like, because you're being creative and you're going back and you're going, okay, these are the things, how do I respond to that? And the thing about REST that's different from a trauma reaction, from fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, is you can be years down the road, go back to that moment with REST and rewrite your ending and heal that wound. And that's the cool thing I love about it. And then if you rewrite it for yourself, you've rewritten it for everyone that came before you, and you are rewriting it and breaking the cycles for everyone that comes after you. That's how powerful that is. So examining what the trigger was, what the red line was, what the threshold was, and then showing yourself a great deal of compassion. What could I do to better prepare myself for that next time? Because really, when you think about not doing that, when you don't make that effort in your healing journey, you set yourself up to be re-traumatized. And that the initial trauma is not your fault, and the way you suffer with it from there is not your fault until you know better. And I can say today unequivocally that after this class, you will know better. And it doesn't mean you will be perfect and you're not going to make mistakes and be a complete biological human being, because you are and you will. But the goal with that is to not beat yourself up and shame yourself, but rather to go, yeah, I had a fight response. Wasn't my best moment. I know now that situation isn't for me, or that these are the things I can't do when that situation is going on. Right. And in that way, you're showing yourself love and compassion, and that's the healing work. So with triggers, though, for instance, you are triggered into a fight response, you will go back to a fight response moment that you lived. And you can't tell the difference between that moment and what's happening in present day. That's how you know you're in a full-blown trigger. You're not just activated. You can't tell time. You don't know where you are, except back in a moment that you have already lived through traumatically, right? And so that's what trauma responses are going to do. They're going to take you back in time and say, heal this, heal this. This wound is still here, heal this. And REST is going to say, thank you, let's honor you. And we're going to do rhythm. We're going to rise to meet this thing. We're going to resolve whatever is frozen in us. And we're going to reframe in compassion, courage, and curiosity. So that's my rant on that. All right. Are we good to move on to shame? Cool. So real quick, it's a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. And I wanted to delve deeper into this with defining what is wrong, because to some people, what's wrong may not be the same thing across the board, but wrong is anything that is unjust, dishonest, or immoral. And everyone understands the feeling of injustice. At least they should. If you don't understand what the feeling of injustice is, you have too much privilege. There, I said it. But injustice and inequality, or not having equity, that feels wrong, and that can be conducive to bringing shame into the space. Dishonesty. Now, I want to say dishonesty, there are different reasons people lie. Some people lie to cover their butt, and some people lie because they have a problem, because it's become a safety. If I lie, it appeases you. Lying can be a fawning response. Absolutely can be a fawning response. But notice how that comes with a lot of shame. And then immoral. So this is where I talk a lot about self-betrayal, self-abandonment, because fawning will have you doing that. And anytime you feel like you have a moral wound, you're going to feel shame. And so that's the definition of wrong. unjust, dishonest, or immoral. And I also wanted to define foolish, because foolishness is not the same thing as foolish. Okay. Foolishness can be kidding around. It can be playful. It can be lighthearted. It doesn't necessarily come with shame. It can be a way that we roast each other with your foolishness. That's how we say it, right? Whereas actual foolish is lacking good sense or judgment or unwise. And it's very, I would say foolish is also another good word for foolish is impulsive. I don't have any ability to think past this moment. So I'm just going to meet the perceived need of this moment in any way that is available to me in this moment. I'm not going to think about the consequences. I'm not going to think about if it hurts others. I'm not going to think about what happens in the next moment after that. I'm just this moment and this time and this immediate impulsive need. And so when you're around people who are impulsive, it doesn't mean that they're foolish all the time, but it does mean proceed with caution. You know, there's a difference between spontaneous and impulsive. And what's driving that? And I would always ask, what is driving that? What is driving this impulse to do this thing? And when you have the ability to question that, you have the ability to start combating shame. So we talked about how to know when shame is present: denial, attack self, attack others, and withdraw. And now, you know, shame is not a completely negative thing. There can be good uses for it. They're few and far between because we're such a toxically conditioned society that we don't know how to even tell each other a truth that doesn't feel like we're shaming, or that doesn't bring up shame in the person who needs to hear the truth. So anytime you see these things, you can know that it's either happening for you or someone is sensing it and picking it up for you and therefore behaving accordingly. And then, of course, there's always how to respond. So these are my own ideas on how to respond to shame. They've worked for me well so far. They do fall under the RReST umbrella. But it's really, you know, when you're in denial, recognizing when someone else is in denial. It's important. When we're attacking ourselves, when we're beating ourselves up, that can be part of that fawning response of like, I have to degrade myself so that I can bond with somebody or attach to somebody. And that is not attunement, and that is not connection. But it can be perceived as a good relationship because I've self-deprecated so that you'll like me. Women do this all the time. You look pretty. Oh, thanks. I just got a facial, or this old thing. Like anytime you say this old thing, or I'm not as pretty as you, anything like that, that's self-deprecating is been a conditioned response in women with each other, because we're not allowed to be proud of who we are. How dare you be out here as a lioness, knowing you're a glorious babe, and then also say so? That's not cool. That's ego, right? Shame immediately entered the space, right? So to avoid having someone attack me, that attack other piece, I will attack myself and I will fawn. And instead of just saying thank you or being grateful that you noticed, I have all the self-deprecation for you. And now we can bond through shame. But that is not connection. It is not attunement. It is not compassion. And it's not conducive to being on a higher vibration with other people. Of course, when attacking others, take responsibility. Just this morning, I had a conversation with a friend who was like, you said this thing. And at the time, I didn't intend for the thing to sound the way it landed for this friend. I was being half smartass about it, to be honest. And this friend brought it up to me and was like, this is the thing that you said that hurt. And I could have totally had a shame response and been like, well, if you hadn't, then I wouldn't have blah, blah, blah. And the truth is that I was responsible for the comment that came out of my mouth, regardless of their behavior. And so I took responsibility and I made an apology, and shame got squashed right there. But shame is also what kept them withdrawn from reconnecting with me, because they felt like, oh, she really thinks that, and she's eventually going to turn toxic with that. That's also been their life experience. That speaks to what they've been through. And that's not as much about me, but I did owe them an apology and to take responsibility and to then also reconnect with them because they had withdrawn. And I too had withdrawn. And so we reconnected, and so I say all that to say that when you start to recognize, reframe, take responsibility, and then make the effort to reconnect with somebody, you combat all the toxicity of shame. And it also gives you the ability to move forward in relationships and then bond through healing and connection and compassion. So we know about the brain-heart connection. Are there any questions about the brain-heart connection?
Is there a way you could just remind me what that is? I mean, I know that it's connected, but I'm trying to like get it all front and center.
Yeah. So remember, the brain is electric. So every thought that you have is an electrical impulse going throughout the brain. And remember that the heart is magnetic. So as it's beating, as your heart beats, that's sending out a ripple of magnetic field. And some people, I think David was in the class and he said, the higher your vibration, the further out that magnetic field goes. I don't have any science to speak to that exactly. I can say from my personal experience, I would agree with that I'm able to have a larger effect on my community and those in my inner circle when I have been taking care of myself and I have a higher vibration. When I haven't, and I get into pettiness, or I get into lower vibration behavior and money troubles and things of that nature, I don't feel like I have as many people around me and connecting with me. So that's so this is also to say that as you think, it's going to show up in your heart space and what you're attracting or deflecting in your life. So it's important to remember that, like, when you do that catastrophizing and you're just like, oh my gosh, Zoom isn't working. And if Zoom doesn't work, then I'm not going to be able to do this meeting and I'm going to lose my job. And when you start catastrophizing that, you literally start calling in that kind of trouble into your life. And it's not to say you shouldn't have a moment of like, I call it offloading, where you're like, this person did this thing and it totally pissed me off, and you're just like offloading it because you're releasing it. And there's a difference between that and how your mind is charging your heart to attract and deflect what you want in the world. And this, for trauma survivors, shows up in, we see a lot of survival crime. So you have a trauma survivor who's being trafficked. And so now they have to start stealing, and they think to themselves, if I don't steal enough food, then I won't eat and I could starve to death. And if I don't do this many tricks, then I won't make enough money to appease my pimp. And then I'm going to be in this kind of life struggle. And so then they start calling in trouble from those around them. And they do start getting, it's like, no matter what they do. And you see a lot of the fawning response in the brain-heart connection and what you're attracting or deflecting in the world, just because you're thinking a certain way. And so this is why it's so important with survivors to say, you think about a trigger, you think about a moment where you suffered a trauma and your brain goes back to that and you're back in that moment. And now you're creating that to happen again because it's literally you're in your magnetic field. But if you go back to that with RReST and you say, that happened, yes, it did. You name it, you do your parts work around it, you do your restorative response around it, you start, maybe it's rhythm that you need, maybe it's rise that you need, maybe you need to find a different way to resolve or reframe. Whatever it is, when you start to do that from your headspace and it starts to drop down into your heart, now not only are you a healing resource for yourself, you start attracting other healing resources and you start to be that for other people. If you've ever been on your healing journey and then someone just randomly comes up to you and like shares their whole life story and you're like, I don't even know you. Why is this happening right now? And it's because something in you attracted that they feel safe in your presence. And so they had to offload there because there was no chance that you were going to like pick that up for them. It's like, oh, that's a lot. So sorry, move on, So that's just another example of how the brain-heart connection can work together. So electricity, and I have this power cord because it's literally plugged into your heart through your nervous system, and whatever chemicals are being released from your brain are going to go down into your circulatory system. So of course they're going to pass through the heart, and of course that's going to be, as it beats, that's going to be what you're sending out into the world and attracting. And here's that example of like, this is what it looks like in your brain. If we were to really like put just to detect the electronic motion that's happening in your brain. It's like constantly washing over you with just electrical impulse after electrical impulse after electrical impulse throughout the whole brain. And more parts of your brain light up depending on where you are. Like if you're more in your creative space or you're more in your logic space, then it will light up more according to that. But this is just an example of what that can look like. And then of course, in your heart, when it beats, and I just kind of wanted to show like this, each beat is a ripple and another ripple and another ripple and another, and it just keeps going out and further out and further out. And so you have a beat, and then the next beat pushes out the first one, and the next one pushes them out, and the next one pushes them out. So from the time your heart starts beating until it stops beating, you are continually pushing out ripple effects into the world. And if you think about that, am I pushing out, am I attracting and deflecting light or the unlight? Am I attracting and deflecting what serves me or not? So those are some ways to think about it. So we did a lot on the nervous system, and this is again that circulatory system that is just kind of representing what the nervous system looks like. But these veins and stuff would sit more central to the spine, not so much throughout the limbs. The circulatory system goes throughout the limbs, but there are the nervous system would run along here and then speak to the circulatory system and tell it, these are the chemicals we're releasing. This is the actions we're going to take. Okay. And then here's our window of capacity. You'll hear it in other spaces as the window of tolerance. I always try to really be mindful of the language I'm using, and sometimes I'm not going to make anyone happy, and sometimes I'm going to get it just acceptable. But that's why I chose the word capacity versus tolerance. So remember, with this hyperarousal up high and hypoarousal is down low. And so when you think of the two freeze responses, you have the hyper up high deer response and the hypo freeze and the possum response. And of course, then here it is with the sympathetic nerve, ventral vagal, dorsal, the fight, flight, freeze. But this is really what it looks like throughout. We have this, we use this line up here is just kind of, this is ebb and flow. That's what this line represents, ebb and flow. But if we really were to pull it apart, this is real ebb and flow. It's not just this up and down. It's in, it's out, it's entangled, it's enmeshed. It's also colorful. It's also twisty. It's also very creative. And it's what it really feels like in the nervous system. The nervous system doesn't feel like regulation, not regulated. It feels like some parts can be very regulated, some parts can be very dysregulated, some parts can be more hyper aroused, and other parts are going to be more hypo aroused. And it all happens at the same time, which is why it's possible you can be in more than one trauma response at a time. Just because you're having a fight response, that doesn't mean that's the only response you're having. You're probably having a small fawning response in the back, or even a panicking freeze response in the back. But what your dominant response in that space might be the fight. That might be what's coming out through the body, because that's the more felt response or reaction. And so that's another piece about why it's so important to be compassionate with yourself, because you might be thinking that was a fight response. I told them off. And what it really might be is a fawning response, because you told them off while this person was watching, and you knew you could get their approval if you told them off in front of this person. And that could actually be a fawning response, because it's performative and you didn't actually mean it. You just needed to send a message to this other individual, and it had nothing to do with this one. But in your mind, in the moment, you were like, fight response, I told them off, blah, blah, blah. Or fight and shame in that space. So you can kind of see just real quick, it can get, even though trauma can be acute and chronic and complex, and even though it can be individual and communal, it can be expressed and experienced in one or all of the F's. And the beautiful thing about that is, so can rest. Healing can be experienced communally. It can be experienced in a one-off. So I do what I call source alchemy events. And these events are like parties. Like we had a Mad Hatter tea party. And on Saturday, we're going to have a unicorn rainbow party. And it's adults coming because they're excited about the nostalgia and getting a little entertainment and food. And what ends up happening is people start to really tap in and just feel the vibe of this healing space that we've created. And they're having fun while having an acute experience of healing. And they learn a little bit about rest, and then they just go home with that, and it creates a more chronic healing situation. And they'll remember this party they had and this lesson they learned because Rev PJ said that thing when he was the caterpillar, and Pepper Joy said that thing and she was the Mad Hatter. And they're going to remember it because it was imprinted. It was an experience that was imprinting on them a healing experience. So, so all that to say that, like, I really think through the nervous system and how it might interpret the experience of the events that I put on. And I think about all the ways to get sensory input in each of those experiences and events, because I really want people to understand healing doesn't have to be all serious. And healing doesn't have to be so freaking intentional that we've become like shaman bypassers or spiritual bypassers, where we're all about that thing and we're not actually doing the healing work. It's a spontaneous right now, but also longevity. We're planting seeds. Some of them will take, some of them will not. And some of them will be dormant until the person is ready, as in the soil for their soul is ready to receive that seed and then take it and grow it. And so those are all things that I think about. That's kind of what we're doing in the nervous system. We're conditioning it, we're planting seeds, we're sometimes pulling weeds still, and we're sometimes feeling a little overrun with that. And sometimes we're identifying that things aren't weeds. For instance, in real life, that would look like dandelions. Dandelions are actually very healing, but I know a lot of people who hate them. And it's like, when you understand that plant, then you stop fighting that plant and you start to even make room for it. And you start to see it for what it really is to the world, even if before your perception is it's an ugly yellow flower that has a poofy head a couple times a year. And now you can appreciate that poofy head because those are seeds that you can now send out into the world or use them to serve you, right? And so these are just parables and examples of ways that rest can work because of the awareness you'll have in learning it. So rhythm, rise, resolve, refrain looks very messy and complicated, and that's what your journey should feel like. If it doesn't, get a coach, get a therapist, live a little bit more. It'll happen for you, trust. All right, and back to the restorative responses. So then we ask these questions. How do you know it's a restorative response? How do you know? Does it come from a space of compassion, courage, and curiosity? If yes, good job. And that doesn't feel complete to everybody. Sometimes people are like, but I need markers. I need to like, how do I know? Like, define it for me better. And it's like, because you're a creator and it's so individual, I cannot. Only you can. Only you can know and feel and intuit if that's what's working for you. Does it come from a space? And then how do you know it is a restorative response? If it's not, then ask yourself, is this a trauma response or possibly a shame response or both? And then where did it come from? And sometimes it'll be days or weeks before you figure that out. And you just ride that journey anyways. And it's totally fine to take your time. Shame and suffering from trauma is a disconnect between our being and our higher self. So I talk a lot about being in touch with your body. And what's the interesting thing about being in touch with our body is we're so not taught to do it. But when it happens, it's automatically connected to this higher consciousness because it's in the body. And we're saying higher like it's outside of our brain or like it's outside of our window of capacity. And the truth of the matter is it's just much more internal than we've gone. We haven't gone to that temporal lobe where the amygdala and thalamus are connected in partnership. And that's where it is. And so, because we're always taught to look outside of ourselves, go buy this book, get this resource, do this exercise, have this thing. And the real answers are already in you. And the science says that they're in your brain, in the temporal lobe, where your amygdala and thalamus meet. And from there is where your nervous system goes down throughout your body. And that's what's going to send healing messages or control messages throughout the body. Any questions about that so far?
No, I'm totally good with that.
Cool.
I've never been able to connect to the outer side, the outside people who said things like, this is the way you have to feel, this is what you have to do. And it just never worked for me, especially if they were also abusive people,
Right,
so then it just, but it was even beyond that. It was like none of this works for
right.
me.
Yeah, yeah. And it starts to not feel safe. It feels like all modalities are predatory.
Hmm.
And I think that's something in the healing community that we've really started to have to sit with is like capitalism's effect on being healers and how we have to eat, we have to put a roof over our head. But how do we still, because the people who need us are the ones who can't afford us. And how do we still reach them?
Hmm.
And so that's, to me, that's why community care. That's why alchemy events, because people who maybe can't afford a one-on-one session with me could totally come to any of my parties and get a healing experience at usually a $20 donation suggestion. And they're going to get fed, they're going to have this healing experience, and then we're all going to sit around and share. And in that, we're going to bond, and we're going to be attuned, and we're going to feel safe, and we're going to start making meaning of it for what does this mean in my life? I can't tell you how many people reached out to me after the Mad Hatter tea that I did and was like, man, when the caterpillar said this line, man, when Frumpty Dumpty said this line, when the Queer of Hearts said this thing, and they were just joking, but I thought, oh my gosh, what a parable for my life, right?
Hmm.
Because here's the thing about that I believe, and I'm totally stealing this from another coach in the association, but I do believe in a person's ability to heal.
Yeah.
If you're capable of breathing, you're capable of healing. It's just, do you know that's what you're doing or not? So that's my soapbox on that. All right. So obviously self-compassion and then compassion for others, but it always starts with yourself. If you're not showing yourself compassion, and if you feel like, man, I try to deal with this person, but I just can't, there's just something about them that vexes me. That's your part saying to you, there's not enough compassion here. We're not getting enough of it. It's literally an attachment cry with a need for you to show yourself more compassion. Because when you're showing yourself and you're living in like this compassion bubble, then when this person who vexes you walks up, you're not as vexed. You already know your boundaries, you already know your energy, you already know your tolerance, your capacity, and you either have that space or you don't. And the more compassion you have, the more space you have. Compassion doesn't take up room, it makes room. Okay, so with that, it's also going to take a lot of courage. It is not for the faint of heart to be like, I'm going on a healing journey. I think I'm ready to fix my life. And then be like, the next time they see someone light up a cigarette, be like, oh my God, it smells so good. I can't even do this. And if that's where you find yourself, that you can't even tolerate being in the presence of a coping mechanism that no longer serves you, then you'd probably need to do some courage work. Because it's courageous to say no. It's courageous to say no and use boundaries. It's courageous to say no to the things that have been resources for you. It's courageous to do so. And sometimes, and remembering this, that courage is not the act of leaving safety to do a thing. That's bravery. Bravery is a shield and a sword, and we're going to battle, and we're going to stand up for the injustice. We're going to stand against inequality. We're going to be activists and martyrs, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but absolutely a heroic way. That's bravery. Courage is saying no without explaining yourself. Courage is when conflict is in front of you, showing yourself compassion anyways, and letting them be conflicting without you engaging and charging emotionally into that. Courage is saying, I'm not going to that family dinner, or I'm not going to have this thing. It is, and it might even be saying yes to things that are more healthy or appropriate for your life. And only you can know what that is, but you'll know as soon as you say the no, or as soon as you say the yes, you will automatically feel courageous or cowardly, and that'll be the answer. When you really feel into your body and you're saying yes or no to things, you will have an automatic reaction of feeling courageous or cowardly. And courage doesn't come without fear. And so understanding the difference between courageous and leaning into the fear anyways, and cowardly and flighting away, or freezing away or withdrawing, understanding what those differences feel like in your body require you to go make decisions in which you will not like the end result. It's part of a life experience, is making these decisions and then feeling like, oh, well, I just learned that wasn't the right decision because I feel cowardly for it and I want to run away. And oh, no, I feel brave about this. I'm going to sit in my power. I understand now that's what the felt sensation of courage and leaning into the fear anyways really is. But you will make mistakes in doing that. And that's why compassion first. Because when you go to make courageous decisions, you might find out that they were brave. You might find out that they were not the right decision for you at that time. And it's all part of the human experience. So showing yourself compassion is always the answer. And then to reconnect to curiosity. So curiosity is the anti of shame. Curiosity is also the charge for creativity. If you're not curious, your creativity only knows the bounds of safety or academia or definitions or whatever it is, you will not be able to combat shame. You will catastrophize. You will not do well in your healing journey because you're not curious. Again, we're meaning-making machines. We are creators. So curiosity is a big deal in that. Shame keeps us from being creative. It keeps us from wanting to go deeper, from wanting to suffer the knee scrapes of learning the things and making the decisions. Shame can freeze you, and like whenever you want to make a decision, and it can freeze you from making that decision because if I courageously go do this thing, I could get hurt. I could get hurt. I could get hurt. And when we start to, in this world, stop fearing hurt, I do believe that our fear of pain and hurt is a shame response and a fear response. And it's rooted in because we don't understand how healing works. And if we really understood it, we wouldn't be so afraid to live, like really live, like go experience the world. We wouldn't be afraid of traveling. We wouldn't be afraid of meeting new people. We wouldn't be afraid of trying new things. And anytime we deny ourselves trying new things and meeting new people and going new places, those are signs that we might not be curious. And that can also be influenced by things like financial situations, absolutely. But you can be curious and read a book and learn something. And you can be courageous and learn new things. So curiosity is very powerful, and it's why it's in here. It's not about, you notice I don't say go be mindful, go meditate, go sit and go ground. I don't say those things. I say curiosity, because when you get bored and your curiosity starts to peak about something, the creator in you has awakened. And now you're dangerous to the world in the best way. So I heavily encourage curiosity. So rhythm, rise, resolve, and reframe, and do so with compassion, courage, and curiosity. That is the main message. You know my book, where to find it. And you're going to remember to live your best life from the inside out and stay curious. Stay curious. Are there any questions about any of this? Not yet.
I have a question about the courage part. Like when I wanted to take this class, I had panic attacks. And I did it anyway. I mean, I signed up anyway, obviously, and I've been here, and the panic attacks stopped. I mean, well, around the class, not in other areas, but so I'm wondering, like, I wanted to take it to help heal.
Mhm.
I wanted to learn more about because I have the book, but it felt kind of like, it felt a little overwhelming to me, right?
Sure. Yep.
And so I thought, okay, this will help me understand that, because I have been into understanding the chakras for a long time. And when I first started doing cranial sacral therapy for my
Yes.
migraines, then
Mhm.
they would always, oh, this chakra is stuck,
Yeah.
this one's stuck, send it some energy so it'll spin right, and now I can't feel all of them at the moment, but for a while there, I could feel them all, and I could feel when they were stuck and stuff. So that's one of the things when you gave that free seminar, I was like, oh yes, I'm down with this.
Yes.
But then when I signed up, thinking about signing up for the class and actually signing up, more panic attacks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes I wonder if that's what stops some people from trying to heal. It's something inside that's going on. And I don't understand how that would be protective. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That it's being protective because perhaps there was a time where you took a risk to learn a new thing that you thought would be good for you, and it went disastrously for you. Or it simply didn't pan out the way you thought it would. It's also possible that somewhere in your life, someone said things to you like, the audacity of you to think, who do you think you are?
Oh God, that's my grandma. Okay.
So it wouldn't surprise,
Okay.
it wouldn't surprise me at all. And I don't mean to mind your business in this space, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if you felt that as a child. Remember, think about how young you were whenever someone says to you, how dare you? Who do you think you are? And you're just, up to that point, you had no awareness that you were anybody but you. And you're operating the world. I'm me in the world. I'm going to do these things, and I'm going to climb the trees. I'm going to scrape my knees. I'm going to do the thing, like whatever it is. And then someone suddenly calls into question, who do you think you are? Well, I didn't know that I wasn't me. I thought I was out here being me. And now perhaps we've triggered an identity crisis, because if who you are has the audacity to be in this world and offend your grandma, that's a burden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see, I mean, I can see that was total. I mean, everything I wanted to do or not do, like not get married, go to high school, all of that was like, no, you can't do that. Who do you think you are? So I guess, and I just talked with my therapist this morning about it. We spent like the whole hour on this, in fact,
Mhm.
so I'm thinking, when you take a step toward healing,
Mhm.
maybe that voice, maybe grandma's voice is still in there,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
being hateful and abusing me. And
Right.
even though it wasn't conscious.
Absolutely. Right. Because here's the thing, as a child, you don't have the ability to cognitively separate yourself from the behavior. So this is why shame is so powerful and painful for children, because instead of thinking I did a bad thing, it's I am a bad thing. And so up to that moment, you had no idea that you were being anybody but you. And then suddenly you're called into question for being you. And it makes sense why you would fragment. And there's a part of you that's now holding grandma's voice to remind you, you're out here being you, and that's potentially
And
offensive.
that's bad. Because
Right.
I hadn't done any of the things I said I was going to do. Like, I was a little kid saying, I want to be a writer. I don't want to get married. I want to, go to college, that kind of stuff. And that's the reaction. So that kind of makes sense. If then I say, okay, I'm going to take this course and I'm
Right.
going to heal.
Mhm.
And even though I didn't hear my grandma's voice, some part of me must have heard it.
Absolutely. Somewhere in your body, it's there.
And then I had a panic attacks.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you also add to it, let's take it a step further, because this is why it's so important to address and name and heal that part that's
Mhm.
holding grandma's narrative for you. Maybe
Mhm.
not her voice, but her narrative. Because why would that be her response? Instead of being like, oh my gosh, look at you building your life your way, living in this world with the audacity to just do it your way and not give two shits, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
What would cause a woman to say that, especially to her granddaughter? Some kind of perhaps fear, some kind of her own shame. Maybe you watching you in the world brought up shame for her. Maybe watching you in the world triggered a trauma for her. Maybe it brought up fear for her because society didn't operate with the capacity to even allow that when she was growing up.
Or when I was growing up. I mean,
Right?
I was born in the 50s, and this was not, women did not, I mean, obviously women did do these things,
Right. But it was
but no one in our family had ever done anything like that. Yeah.
yes. Right. So you're doing something completely different from the rest of the nuclear family system, which is now creating space between you and the sun.
Mhm.
You're being exiled out here. And so because you're being exiled out here like Pluto, there's a part of you that was like, hold on, we can go back in, we can get a little bit closer to the sun if I'll just internalize this, and I will be the fragmented part and carry that for you. And anytime you move past this degree from the sun, I'm going to be in your ear reminding you, don't you dare. Right?
Yeah.
And that's exactly, and then here she is in the world, and she's just like, I've created this nuclear family. This is the systems that we operate in. These are the rules. These are the dress codes. These are the religions. Like,
Yep.
everything else is not allowed. These are
Here's what women do. Here's what men do. And
right?
that's no leniency, no variation, nothing.
Right. And so
Mhm.
now you can hear that narrative and hopefully with compassion say, that's not my narrative. I give that back to you, Grandma. I appreciate that for you. It probably came from a place of fear, and you only knew how to control and shame through that. You didn't know how to connect and encourage and empower through that, because it was something that definitely would not have worked in your day, and you don't know what it looks like today.
Right.
You know? And so now, instead of letting this be a narrative that harms you, it can be a reminder of, that's how far I've come. I've gone from grandma's narrative gives me panic attacks every time I do something brave and against the mold.
Mhm.
And you can hear that voice and go, I honor that you are here. I release you to your destiny. But now we're going to lean more into, instead of this shame response, instead of this internalized fight response, or this freeze response that turns into a panic attack, whatever, maybe it's 3 or 4 of them. And that's why it turns into a panic attack, because they're all just cycling through and you just can't help but hyperventilate through it.
Mhm.
Maybe that's what's going on. But then there's also this reality of like, just going back and saying, okay, this thing caused me panic attacks. So my compassion response to that is going to be, that happened. Yes, it did. I leaned in and did it anyways. And now at the end of the class, do you have regrets?
Oh God, no. I didn't have from the first moment of the class.
Right.
I mean, I didn't have panic attacks about the class anymore,
Right.
because it was just gone.
Right. And perhaps the panic attacks are the sign you should do it.
Probably.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, do it. We could die if we stay here. We could get married and be barefoot and pregnant. Like, run into that.
Yeah. Oh my God, don't go to high school. Get married and have children.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's all feedback. So instead of looking at these panic attacks even as like a negative, I'm sure they're not fun. I know they're not fun.
Oh no, they're terrible. Yeah.
But once they happen and you start to notice what the triggers are,
Mhm.
Remember that conditioning. So now you can go back to, like, when you think back to just the thought of being in this class triggered this hyperventilation in me.
Mhm.
And then you can just say, there's no point in panicking. I'm taking the class anyways. And or just walk away completely. And so now you can start to condition yourself to, ooh, these are the red flags that I might get a panic attack. Must do. Press the button, take my money, do the thing, right?
Yeah.
And that is how I would, if that's compassionate for you. If it's
Oh, I mean, obviously it's compassionate. I'm here. I
right.
mean, yeah. I mean, I just said, well, I'm doing it anyway. I mean, I
Yeah.
want to heal. I
Right.
want to help other people heal. I mean, this is what I want to do. And so I'm doing it. I don't care if I'm going to be 67 in a couple of weeks. I mean, I don't care.
I
What
love
difference does it make? Sometimes people go, oh, I'm too old to heal. It's like, wow, really? You're
right.
younger than why is it too old to heal? That's like saying, okay, if you're dead, then it's too old to heal. But
Exactly.
if you're not, I don't understand that. It's like, yeah, I want to heal.
Right. Yeah. If your heart is beating, that means that there's a magnetic field leaving your body.
Mhm.
That means that you're still capable of healing or harming. And that's the thing about, if we don't heal, and I will say this, I will own up to the fact that when I have not been doing the healing work intentionally, I have defaulted to toxicity. And it's the natural, it's you heal or you get infected. And sometimes when you decide to heal, you've already got the infection. So you got to go through and like do the layers and do the work and do the, and sometimes it takes a few rounds, and so not having shame about the process is a big help. And knowing where your capacity begins and ends helps. And then just having the compassion continually for yourself as you do that. And I want to say, but I'm proud of you for doing it. I'm proud of you for leaning in
Oh,
and doing it,
thank
and
you.
not giving a care about narratives and ages and all of the things that could have even been valid reasons to not continue. It was a valid reason for you to not show up tonight because you had a migraine.
Mhm.
But here you are, and that kind of override of the biological systems of your body, if it's compassionate towards you, because it's going to take you further and hopefully even give you an answer, or at least show you where these migraines originated from. That is so powerful, and it's so worth it. It's so worth it. And I think it's such a beautiful thing that you've leaned in and done it anyways, even though you had plenty of reasons and Mercury's in retrograde to not.
And the leaf blower guy who was just here for 2 hours last Friday morning showed up again today. And it's like, it's, the noise, the smell of the gasoline. I made it through the whole time he was here. I was like, oh yes, I didn't get a migraine. And then in therapy, we went like in a really deep place, like with
Right.
grandma's voice and stuff.
Yeah.
And
So naturally.
triggered a migraine. And my therapist said, okay, but remember, it's trying to protect you.
It is.
Just and it's like, okay, I'm going to take the afternoon off and rest, but because I want to go to the Pepper Joyce class.
Right. Right.
But I didn't think of it in terms of like signing up for the class. I didn't
Right.
think of it like being courageous. Oh, if I'm courageous
Right.
and it goes against the family narrative, then it might trigger a reaction. So
Yeah.
now I'm going to have to really pay attention if I'm going against the family narratives.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's all conditioning.
Mhm.
And it's cool because it's all, you can do parts work around it. There's answers. There are ways to do it. I wanted to, let me get in here. So these are the certificates that will be emailed.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. And so here's yours. I wanted to share it with you. So my husband, Reverend James Greggs, he is the main one behind the Inside Out experience, which is
Uh-huh.
the practice that I operate from as the alchemy practitioner. So So he was like, I want to sign these too. And I was like, yes, let's get you signed on here.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He's been a huge catalyst into my even getting here. That man has always believed in me when I did not have it in me to believe anything sometimes.
Oh, that's
So
nice.
so I was like, anywhere I go, it's totally the Ruth and Naomi of wherever you're at. I'm gonna be right there.
Mhm.
But this is to certify that you have completed this initial course of the restorative response system theory, and that you're both trauma informed and trauma responsive. And so that's an important piece, because oftentimes, trauma informed is like, oh, that's the new sexy verbiage right now. The completion of that is when you can also respond with that. You're not just informed. You're not just going, oh, I see your trauma response. Oh, I see your fight response. I see your flight response. You're saying, I see it, and I have a resource for that. If not for you, for myself, so that I can help you while helping myself.
Mhm.
And so that is something that I hope that you feel very confident in moving forward. And as you get this certificate, so that's one thing that will be emailed to you. And I just want to thank you again for joining this class and leaning in with courageousness. You said you hadn't seen it as courage before, but I think that just speaks to the fact that in society, we don't educate on emotional intelligence enough. Because if you understood what it felt like to be courageous versus what it felt like to be brave, you would have caught that sooner. And so I think that's that's kind of the next stage for me in this, is really buckling down on the studies of emotional intelligence and how they relate to rest, because I really want to teach people, what does this feel like? What does it feel like in the body? What does it feel like in the brain? Because I think we know very clearly after this class what trauma feels like in the brain and in the body.
Mhm.
But to get a felt sense, it's not until you've had some experiences with rest that you start to really take in what's going on, and as far as that's concerned. And then I had one last little thing that I wanted to share with you.
Okay. And then when you have more courses, you're going to email us, right?
Okay.
Okay.
So this is my official commencement speech.
Okay.
And that is, dear,
Wait. Do I need a hat to
you
throw
don't
off when I?
want to, if you want to, you can make a paper hat, whatever you feel like. I actually do have one, actually.
Wait a minute. I never got to throw off a graduation cap before, so
Oh, excellent.
ready.
Oh, I'm so glad we
Okay.
could do this together.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So here we go. Whoops. Let me move this aside. All right. So, dear graduates of the RReST program, today we celebrate your achievements and mark a significant milestone in your journey as a trauma specialist. You have worked hard to gain the knowledge and skills necessary to provide expert care to individuals who have experienced trauma. As you enter this next phase of your career, I want to offer some words of wisdom and inspiration. First, remember that you are now part of a community of experts who are dedicated to healing and helping others. You have the power to make a real difference in people's lives. You have the ability to help individuals recover from traumatic experiences and move forward in strength and resilience. Always remember the important role that you play in people's lives. Second, continue to learn and grow as a specialist. Trauma is complex and it's an evolving field, and there's always more to learn. Stay up to date on the latest research and techniques and seek out opportunities to expand your knowledge and skills. Never stop striving to be the best trauma specialist that you can be. And third, take care of yourself. Working with trauma can be emotionally and physically demanding, and it's important to prioritize your own self. So take care of you. Take breaks when you need them and seek support. and with your colleagues, and engage in activities that bring you joy and relaxation. So just like earlier, whenever I said engage in creativity, that's what I mean. Oops, hold on there. All right. Finally, always remember the power of empathy and connection, and as well as compassion. Your patients, your friends, your colleagues, they may be dealing with intense emotions and difficult experiences. And by showing empathy, understanding, and compassion, you can help them feel heard, seen, and validated. Remember to take the time to connect with your patients on a personal level and to honor their unique experiences and perspectives. And as you move forward in your career as a trauma specialist and RReST certified, I have no doubt that you'll make a profound impact on the lives of your patients and on the field of trauma care. Congratulations on your graduation and best wishes for fulfilling a rewarding career ahead. And so with that, I'm going to, since you've never gotten to do this before, my dear, I'm going to play a special song. Can you hear this?
It's breaking up.
It is, of course it will be. It's pomp and circumstance.
Oh,
Yes. All right, so I'm going to now call your name. We're doing this whole thing. You've worked so hard for this, you deserve it. So Dr. Alexandria Konstantinova.
Seman.
Congratulations on completing RReST and graduating from this initial course, and go forth in the world as a RReST and trauma specialist. All right.
You're wonderful. You're a wonderful teacher. I've loved the course, and I would gladly take any future courses.
I will definitely keep you informed, Doc, and take care of yourself
Thank
and
you.
in future endeavors.
Thank
I'm
you.
proud of you. Mwah.
Mwah. Thank you.